Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, olúwa mi ò dìde ojó ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀.
Welcome, everyone, to Theoryforge Chronicles. I'm Phantom X, of course, joined by Diggs and Legendary Neurotoxin. Happy Friday. How's everybody doing?
Great.
Doing good.
Yeah, OBS continues to be terrible, so I'll try to fix that at some point. At least I can record and stream at the same time now. Well, I guess the biggest thing we have to talk about is the recent massive blog post by Snipe on farming, which actually has a lot of detail and had quite a bit of, I guess, conversation about it in chat. We were hoping actually Sog would be able to join us, and he ended up not being able to because he had some input on that as well. But anyways, here we are. So I'm going to let y'all already know I have a lot to say about this. So was there anything that stuck out or anything y'all want to start with, or do you want me just to sort of jump into it?
Yeah, there were a couple of things. First off, I had to make a flowchart, and I posted it in chat there to just kind of help guide through visually like what all of the different pieces are, because there's a lot of different pieces and a lot of failure points. There's a lot of failure points. So it sounds like a very involved process, and I don't know if the post was meant to make it sound incredibly intimidating, but it sounds incredibly intimidating. And unfortunately, for something that's producing fruits and vegetables, while it's an important sort of thing, the uses for the fruits and vegetables, how they're going to matter, what they're going to mean for the game, is not stated very much, other than, oh yeah, you'll be seeing your vinegars and your booze and your juices and this and that and various different formats that the plants are used for. But other than that, it's really hard for me to get excited about wanting to farm in a game where there's so much minutia to it that it's there's just a whole lot of things you have to track and take care of and make sure at least within a certain range, if not optimal, depending on what your goals are. But then the other thing, and this is a problem that I have with basically any story ever for any content ever made, is the world was born yesterday sort of thing. The way it's described, it gives the feel that sure, there's a knowledge base that exists that you can somehow access to kind of know about the area. But by and large, if you're coming in as a farmer, or coming in as anybody, you choose to be a farmer, you don't have decades to centuries to millennia worth of, prior historic farming techniques and methods and everything, to where it's already dialed in for every single area where people actually exist. It seems like for people to have gotten this far, especially at day one of game launch, actual launch, not the pre-launch stuff, it seems like you should already have so much access to that information, already know very well what everything is that goes everywhere, that this is stuff that should be incredibly accessible, A, and B, should be able to help make it stupid simple for anybody that wants to grow the local staple foods. So that's one of the things that I kind of worry about, is the way that it's worded here. It doesn't, there's the knowledge base, and you can do some things to get metrics on the soil or know a little bit about the soil when you first come into the area when the game starts. But it feels like all of the agricultural architecture and infrastructure should already have been running smooth by the time day one actually starts. It doesn't feel like we're just plop down everywhere and should just be starting to discover this stuff.
Easy to start, difficult to master.
Yeah, I mean that's what it seems. Yeah, I mean I guess like any craft. I mean so I have quite a bit that I grow out back. Not that I'm any expert in any of that, but that's where it's sort of interesting to see what I do compared to what's in the post and what's sort of expected. It's interesting. You mentioned sort of what are we going to use it for? Because at the end, it kind of does talk about it, like, right, if you have some crops that you don't do right, that it might not be edible food. It turns into being used some in industrial reasons or alchemy reasons, which was interesting because the example given, and these are examples, I don't know, if this is actually going to be in the game, but was the sour apple, right? That some people might not like your apples because they're sour. And my immediate question is how am I going to know, like, how will I know that in the game? How will my character know it's sour? What is the difference, right?
Well, Snipehunter says, Euro, you ignorant slut. So that's your ignorance, right? You just have to build your character up to know. That's what books are for, I guess.
Well, that's true. That is true. Part of it, yes, Nura did seem kind of like, you're going to have to figure it out, which is a daunting task. I can pick up a book right now and learn everything.
He says it's not the world that doesn't know, it's you that doesn't know your character. So.
But that goes. So that my immediate question is, okay, what is reading through all this? It mimics real life, right? Basically. So how much of farming is essentially based on how you actually farm in real life, and how much of it is going to be more of this sort of fictional low fantasy kind of realm, or is the intention to mimic real life? Because there are a lot of it. My biggest thing reading through it was that it seems almost overly complex. If you're wanting to look at how I go in my backyard and do things, at work, it's just fun for me. So I grow a lot of, a bunch of different stuff. So I'm usually at work bringing in, like last year, cucumbers and squash. Stuff that we just didn't have time. I couldn't eat it all. And everyone sort of asks, well, what do you, how that seems so fun. How do you, it seems like it'd be so hard to start a garden. And what do you do? It's like you put a seed in the ground and you water it. That's what you do. So it's obviously a little bit more complex than that, but it almost felt like in Elyria, it's going to be more complex than it is going outside to grow stuff, which was a little concerning to read that. Just because. Well, part of it is I don't know, again, how much I don't want things to feel like work. And then it is still, I know we talk about, NPCs and things, but it is still a world that's going to require quite a few people involved to make it work like it's supposed to. So, crafters, we've always talked about crafters make these things sort of run. And, how much are you going to drive people away by being too complex? That was my initial. I've read through it now 3 or 4 times, but that was my initial sort of, wow, this is very, very in depth. I can tell you there's like pH, that's sort of talked about at the beginning. Again, it kind of comes down to what is going to mimic real life. There's essentially 90, like almost all vegetables at least that you're going to eat prefer 6 to 7 pH, 6.5. That's like consistent. The only thing I've ever had to lower in my backyard was for blueberries, which went like a 5.5 pH, right? So everything else grows basically in the same range. So
why don't you read off a list of what you have? Do you still have that handy?
I don't know that people really care, but I can.
I think it will be helpful to the discussion because then we can go into what other stuff we might be planting.
So cucumber, squash, zucchini, kale, green beans, peas, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, Swiss chard, arugula, eggplant, peppers, blueberries, blackberries, watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew, strawberries, tomatoes, lettuce, endive, and corn. And then there's several herbs: mint, lavender, spearmint, cilantro, basil, rosemary, dill, rue, lemon balm, fennel, parsley, and catnip. So that's a lot of edibles, a lot of herbs, and they're all planted in the same soil, and they're all growing.
And you said some of the herbs are to fend off insects.
Yeah, well, and we can, I
Right.
guess, move on to that later. But
Well,
yeah,
just
the
because-
reasoning. Yeah,
Just because
so I don't have herbs.
Snipehunter says that it depends on what you grow and where too. And
What-
so I'm kind of wondering by that could mean that, those seem to be stuff that we grow here for gardening, eating, edible purposes, but in some other environment it might be very different, and then you wouldn't have the same pH is maybe what he's getting at. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, you just totally threw me off, where I was
sorry.
going. That's true. My question then would be, if you're in the desert, why are you trying to grow cucumbers? But
Yeah, I was thinking maybe you would be trying to. Maybe I don't know what grows in the desert, but maybe you'd be trying to grow
Cactus.
something.
I know that.
Well, yes. So right, cactus in your garden is not going to work too well, probably. But there's some other stuff. But anyway, so you were talking about pH at the moment.
Yeah, well, and
back where you
that
are.
sort of falls into, a lot of it's, and it seemed to read like, every plant's going to have a specific, very specific need in order to grow and thrive. When all of that stuff's just sitting back in my yard in the same soil, it's all growing, right? Most plants are going to be between a 6 and a 7. Most of the earth that you're in is going to be in that range. It will vary some, but it's just that seemed more complex than what I do now. Not completely. There certainly are situations, like I said, the blueberries. I mean, those grow better in a lower pH, but everything else. And then like asparagus likes a little bit more basic, but everything else, it's all within a certain range. So I just hope it's not so complex, right? That because let's say you want to do like 5 different types of plants, how am I going to have to go and make 5 different rows, till 5 different rows, and each one has to have a different pH because the game is expecting a different pH in order for it to thrive. Now, I recognize it's not an all or nothing.
Meters?
Yeah, but still, even then, I mean, large areas, right? Tennessee, the soil is basically going to be the same where I'm at, 20 miles from where I'm at, right? It's all. Now that's going to be very different, probably from California, from the desert. So in broad terms, it makes sense. But then my question again is, so if you're living in a desert area, why are you, you're going to probably try to grow things that thrive in that area, which, and the same goes to irrigation systems. I can understand if you're in an area like the desert, you're going to probably need an irrigation system. I didn't know, the idea that every large scale farm needs some sort of irrigation system also kind of threw me a little, because it just does, in addition to my backyard, we also rent out quite a bit of land farmland to a dude that grows whatever he decides to grow each year. Last year it was corn. So I also sort of get to see what a large scale farmer does, and there's no irrigation system out there. It's just Mother Nature, and it all grew.
Well, okay, but a couple things that Snipe has said. He said that you want to start by cultivating what's already growing there, and that you'll have an easier time growing what already does, right? And then he says that the ranges will pretty much hold true in CLE, although they have some extreme biomes. So it sounds like you won't have too much problem if you start out by farming what's already growing in that region.
Well,
Right.
and that's another sort of,
especially in that biome.
yeah, well, and that's another question, because a lot of plants, right, come from breeding over time and trying to get things to grow a certain way. So where are we going to actually start, right? So is it just all wild? We might only have 5 or 6 different things that are edible, and you have to sort of pollinate from there on and growth. I mean, is that going to be, that wasn't really commented. I don't know if that's planned.
Well, it sounds like
There's going to be a
right?
large variety.
So it's just, I guess it's still just me not really understanding, because it just seemed to mimic real life so much, right? So is that the intent? or not. And I see he says that they didn't mean to imply irrigation would be needed. And that's good. Because the thing is, so there are other things, right? So you overwater and things start to die. So so will the game be punishing that way? So if someone does set up an irrigation system and every day they water their plants, are they going to actually kill their plants? Because each average plant needs like an inch of water a week. Now that will vary based off sunlight, but
sunlight, water retention of the soil, probably a lot of different factors for
kind of,
because they did say water retention is going to be a factor, and tilling affects that in some ways.
That is, again, real life, that is more how often do you water. It's still like an inch a week, right? So here it's very clay, so everything tends to sit for a little while. So you basically water once a week for an inch. If it's more sandy, you sort of do it twice, half an inch each time. So the amount kind of ends up the same. It just becomes more how often do you do it? But I mean I several cucumbers just a week ago outside died because I put transplanted them. All of a sudden the next day there's 2 inches of rain. They're done. Like they all turn white and they're done. So
part of what Snipe's saying here is part of what the system does is create regional dietary differences. Different biomes and thus different tribes will have different staple foods, different recipes for cooking, different farming and cooking methods, etc. It creates differences that are integral to the economic model of the game. So that does make sense. And, going back to something that was said earlier, it does make sense that you would try growing what already exists in the area or what established farmers, NPC or otherwise, are already growing, instead of like trying to import some new plant somehow and start growing it on the chance that it might work and it might be popular. Some civilizations might not even like that. If you try to do that with Weird, they might be like, you know what, we're just going to burn that and plant the stuff that we know needs to go there because, we already have a planned economy. Don't be messing with it.
And this statement by Snipe has me wondering about different tribes and the way they cultivate and cook the same crops. Right? Are those differences? And I wonder if I don't know if tribal methodology is better than another. But
I don't know that anything is necessarily better so much, just that it's just different. Like some people might turn it into a paste, some might slice it up and throw it into a soup, some might eat it whole as a salad.
Well, I partially mean just even the farming of it, even before we get to the cooking of it. But because one of the fascinating things to me about farming that we kind of touched on a little bit tangentially before we went on air is crop rotation versus fertilizing, where the Europeans came over to the New World and were like, oh, these savages don't know how to farm. We don't need to worry about their stupid crop rotations. We're going to teach them how to farm. And now, centuries later, they're like, oh, maybe that Three Sisters crop rotation that they use.
I knew that's where you were going with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it would be fascinating if that was part of some of the tribal differences worked out that way to see how far it goes. Would it be that fertilizing in this area, the same crops is better or worse depending than the crop rotation?
Well, and that's what had confused me a little bit about it too. We were talking about because essentially, I mean, when you're fertilizing, you are replacing what's missing. I mean, that's the whole point of fertilizing. So there probably wouldn't necessarily need to be a big reason to flip flop crops. I mean, you could. Maybe it does provide some sort of other benefit that we don't know yet. I mean, I don't know. It could be less costly. I mean, certainly if you don't have to pay for fertilizer, then.
That's what I was going to say is if it's something where you just know that if you do the rotation in such a way, you'll never have to worry about fertilization. You'll never have to worry about parasites and disease and stuff establishing themselves in the area, then it would make sense to, keep doing it that way. And then if you want to get into using fertilizers and other sorts of things to try to further optimize yeah, for production purposes, or once you've got it dialed in, then to be able to start making those sorts of variations. But initially, it sounds like somebody who's just starting to get into this, just getting everything working to begin with is probably the single most important thing.
Yeah, I am Medusa says your families or mentors in the game will have the knowledge to teach you. Assuming you spark the child of a farmer, yeah. Yeah, so how you're taught and what you're taught and when, and those all could be factors.
Sorry, I'm just reading this. Unless you spark into the soldier's kid, and then it's on you. Yeah, it just seems. I mean, because ultimately, to me, it's putting a seed in the ground. Now, there will obviously be differences in large scale versus small scale. That will be interesting to see how that's done differently.
And I'm wondering if we're going to have metrics for things like you mentioned the water. What happens if you water too much? Will we be getting metrics that we can then look at that will tell us, oh, maybe that's what the cause of this is, so don't do that next time?
There will be visual indicators. That's what they've said is you check on your plants when there's ever any sort of ailment. There will be some sort of telltale signs. You'll see leaves yellowing or holes being chewed into it, or whatever thing is afflicting your plant. You'll be able to diagnose either because you know how these things work, as a player, or I would imagine you use some sort of tools or guides that exist for farmers to kind of flip through the pages and figure out what exactly it is, like what are the signs that you're supposed to be looking for, and then how you're supposed to remedy them. How do
you know, right? How does your character know?
It's I think a visual sort of thing is what they intend for it to be, but I'm wondering if it's a visual sort of thing that when you like flip to the page in the book and then you inspect the plant and then you like kind of look back and forth a couple of times, you see, the character realizes, and then it kind of glows and says like, oh, you've got root rot, or you've got overwatering, or
because if you Google why is my cucumber leaf, why are my leaves turning white, you're going to get like 3 or 4 very different reasons. So how do we figure that out? Is it overwatering? Is it a nutrient that's missing? Is it an insect of some sort? Or is that again trial and error, and you learn? That's
one of the things that I'm, I guess, wondering on the dev side. Have you guys, Snipe? Have you guys set it up in such a way that there's a pretty predictable cause and effect sort of thing, that if something is visually affecting the plant, that you can associate it generally with one specific thing? Or is there variance where one thing occurring visually to the plant could actually be stemming from one of multiple different causes, and then you need to bring in an alchemist or a plant whisperer or whomever to figure out exactly what it is?
Well, you shouldn't need an alchemist if it's available. Your farming character should know.
Yeah, you'll see it in the world.
They would probably have no reason, no clear understanding.
When you inspect the soil and the plant, you'll see traces of what's going on in a close-up view of the plant and soil. What you can identify as the symptom depends on your farming skill, and your character's knowledge will determine what possible maladies are present.
Presented to you as
suspects. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's okay.
Correct. So as long as your character has metrics for that, because your character should be more knowledgeable about farming than a player might be, especially me as a player.
Well, I guess how does your character learn? If you're only presented with a few, like, do you try to remedy how it doesn't work, and your player dies? Like, then I guess what's the next part to that? Like, how do you further your knowledge? How long does this is going to sound so stupid because I don't know, but how long is a season? Like in real time? Do we know? A growing season.
What, a couple of weeks or something? I can't remember. The time's so collapsed and abbreviated, I can't actually remember what one farming season would look like in real world days.
Yeah, because I mean, if farming seasons are fairly short, a week or two, then okay, I could, the idea of, okay, I don't know very much. I think this might be a water issue. Let me fix, and it doesn't work, and then somehow the next season you gain further knowledge. I mean, that would be fun, but. Week is a year in game, so yeah. So then it would be less than a week for each growing season.
A week is a year? That seems a little fast. Are we sure it's not a month is a year? Let's see. Seasons are pretty short. They actually last less than a week, so they can vary too. So actually get seasons that sometimes last more than a week. Oh, okay. So it is a week a year. Okay.
So then I guess also will there be, spring planting and then also fall planting? Like you can do, there's 2 growing seasons, 2 different types of things you can grow in each season. So I'm also curious about that. Right. So like now I, start off with basically leafy vegetables, right? Kale, lettuce. Mm-hmm. Eventually it gets too hot, those bolt and they no longer produce, and then you put in your tomatoes because they like to have an average temperature of such a degrees, and they eventually those get to where they don't, you get closer to your frost, so then you can plant, even a third crop. So, you can put in carrots or radishes or things that are a little bit more hardy for the colder months. There are 2 planting seasons. Cool.
Gosh, that is basically like hyper Stardew Valley at that point. Like instead of having the, I'm just thinking about how that game uses an abbreviation of time for your plants and stuff. This is turning over way faster. I guess in terms of how long a day is in game, maybe not. But it just, you're gonna have to be on top of things. Like you're just constantly planting and watering and harvesting. Like I don't know, there's a lot of downtime. Is what I'm just
thinking. I could have a shit day at work, not log into the game, and to come in tomorrow and beetles ate all of my plants. That's crazy. I mean, that'll be fun. That will also solve the issue of, or the question of hybrid plants and things like that, because that'll be a lot easier to do in a time frame. Part of the reason the seasons are variables to give farmers longer windows.
That's kind of interesting. Farming seasons last so that people can farm on the weekends. I don't know. I'm asking. That's
I could see something like that. That would make sense.
So that was one thing that was in there that I actually did like. Once something starts growing, it's not necessarily watering can become an issue. I don't know how temperature will be, and if we're going to have like extreme temperatures. Certainly, if there's a run 100-degree temperatures, then I have to water pretty often. But pests and insects and different kind of fungus and stuff, that actually I think would be an interesting part of this, because that is very much real. That's my biggest pain in the ass in trying to grow anything, is trying to keep it away from other things that want to eat it. So that'd be kind of cool. Not just smaller pests, but even larger animals, like the equivalent of groundhogs or whatever, deer. So will fencing become a necessity? Can we trap things and kill them? That seems interesting to me. I hope that's kind of developed a fair amount.
The stuff eating your plants.
Well, yeah, because, again, once something is in the ground and growing, there is not a lot to do. You just sort of let nature kind of do its thing. You make sure it has water. That's kind of, you maybe add some sort of fertilizer later on if you want, but you just sort of let it do its thing. And then you're sort of battling everything else that wants to eat it. And it was sort of touched on, and you mentioned earlier the idea of mixing different plants together, what would be called companion planting, either to one increase, there's some theories that if you plant this is totally probably not correct, but I don't have my book with me. Say you plant cucumber next to a tomato, that somehow that helps each other grow. So will that exist to some degree? But then also, the whole reason I have all those herbs out there is specifically to try to keep certain insects away from just destroying what's out there, because they will do that. There's we tried to grow pumpkins last fall, and there's something called a squash bug that typically will feed on squash, but also pumpkins, and it just destroyed it. I mean, it was
Pumpkins or squash.
It was gone.
Yeah, I don't know, like citronella or something. I think of
marigolds, dill.
Yeah.
That's what's out there right now.
Seems like there's a lot of.
Supposedly, we'll find out if it works.
Yeah.
But also, there was comment on attracting bees. That's important too. Pollinators are important. Having a beekeeper or something nearby. Can't get fruit if you don't have anything to actually come to your flowers. Most people don't realize that your vegetables will also flower. It's kind of interesting. The first time broccoli sprouted into flowers, my wife was amazed. Because it doesn't really dawn on you, right, that this will actually flower if you let it go. Lettuce, all that. Didn't really talk about harvesting seeds, like if that's going to be a part of the process afterwards. Do you let certain crops grow till they produce seeds? Most of it we consume before it does, but how do you continuously supply yourself with seeds?
Right. And it seems like some method of extracting seeds from the harvest and being able to have them prepared for the next one. That could very well be a business in itself, is all you do is you plant the seeds, or you plant the crops that produce a large yield of seeds, and you just be the person that's got the seed stock for everybody.
Yeah. Or Snipe, can we select over time certain plants that are resistant to certain insects, resistant to certain diseases? Because those certainly exist in real life.
Yep.
Is that something that can be done? Do we get so good at that? Is that possible, and we get so good at it that doesn't really matter if there are bugs anymore? Sort of the reverse of, not really the reverse, but do they spend all this time implementing some sort of system for disease, and we've created some sort of
It might get adapted to one thing, but then it might lose adaptation to another thing. Like I remember my brother telling me about a lab partner who was working on making E. coli that was resistant to Lysol. She just spray the toilet every day and swab it until she got E. coli that wouldn't die with Lysol. But with doing that, I would imagine there's some other disinfectant that just obliterates it instantly, because just being resistant to Lysol doesn't necessarily mean it's resistant to all chemical antibacterials.
Yeah.
So it's, you might specify, it's like, okay, well, these squash cannot be harmed whatsoever by these squash bugs. The things just, bite into, and it tastes terrible to them. Great. Okay. But now something else likes it. Or the squash bugs go after something else now. But that'll be interesting to see how we can mitigate and remedy those things. The idea of alchemic solutions, basically your chemical pesticides, does seem like an interesting sort of thing. But then I wonder, and Snipe, you don't have to reveal this if you don't want to, but if somebody was using a bunch of pesticides, is that going to get into the crops, and is that going to affect people? Or are you guys totally getting away from that because that is totally not the point of the game? Because I kind of hope you guys don't do that.
There's diseases, and there's what do they call them? The fuck zones.
There's the blights.
Is that what they're calling them? It's something, I forget what the. But yeah, there's like radioactive and danger zones where you're not supposed to go into. So it seems like there could be alchemical pesticides to go along with that.
Plague biomes, yeah.
So, and I'm curious how varied each biome will be, because, again, just real life, we have hardiness zones, right? So there's different, Tennessee has, it's not like it's just one hardiness zone. There's different areas. So will there be that variability? If I go to the, northern part of my county, will it be a little bit different than the southern or the kingdom?
Or in the flatter areas versus toward hillier areas and cliffs, or closer and further from water sources.
Yeah. And the reason I ask is because, a lot of plants can grow in 3-4 different types of zones, right? So it's not like, you have to be in a certain very specific niche. You can grow things pretty well in many different places. But I don't know. That post was very detailed, so I'm really curious to see how detailed things get.
Yeah. And, honestly, that was the thing that I kind of forgot about with everything, was the timing of things, that everything starting and finishing within, roughly 7 days, it makes the guess and check and the experimentation a lot easier to manage. Like, thinking about, for some reason, I was thinking it was like going to be 4 to 6 week cycles for crops and, stuff like that. And obviously with the time scale of the game, that's absolutely not realistic. But I was thinking, man, it's just going to take forever to guess and check and try to refine and home in on like the absolute optimal everything for your plants, for your area. Honestly, doing 1 week iterations, guess and check, try again, remediate, try again, etc. People will probably be optimizing things fairly well within the first real life year of gameplay, I would imagine. Just in time for Longest Night to come along. Longest Night to come along. The 3 weeks of IRL in-game nighttime, where good luck growing things, except for things that don't need light. So that's or mushrooms. Are we just going to be growing mushrooms for 3 weeks? I'm down. But then after that clears, we'll be able to start getting things going again.
I'm not. I hate mushrooms. They're disgusting.
Yes, but does your character hate mushrooms?
Yes.
Ha 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 ha.
I don't know. Can my character taste mushrooms?
It's all about the effects of them.
Well, that goes back to my question of sour apples. How does the character know?
Well, there's no
sour?
grafting. So there's no grafting, so they're all going to be sour, right?
No. It's random whether it's going to be a sour apple or it's going to be one that's actually worth eating, both the flavor and the texture. But yeah, that was something that we talked about. Grafting is kind of important for apple production if you actually want to take one good apple and then replicate it, because going from seed to apples are completely different every single time. And the properties that it selects for aren't the ones that we do. So, the seed doesn't really care whether it tastes good to us. It's just going to grow how it's going to grow. And if it's these teeny little horrible bitter things that are only good to smash up and ferment, then so be it. That's what you got.
Well, Snipe said, when you inspect a fruit, you'll see its properties based on what you know and your farming skill.
Gotcha.
So I could find some, I guess, very
Fruit
dumb
appraisal.
farming dumb warriors and sell them just the most rotten fruit, and they'd never know until they got sick, and then they know.
Well, I
Appraising love for
wonder
fruit.
if there's going to be a sort of a visceral reaction your character gives when they bite into something that just tastes terrible to them. Like, are they gonna complain and spit and not finish it and not get any like nutrition bonuses out of it, or do they have to be disciplined enough to grin and bear it and swallow and eat through it or whatever?
And that's where you mentioned, he also said sharing knowledge. That's sort of the being at the grocery store looking at the cantaloupe and someone tells you to tap on it, right? You know, if it sounds a certain way, that's a good one. Like, is that how we're going to share knowledge? I have another question too. The first of that part of that post was a lot about tilling to aerate your land. But one thing that I'm learning as I learn more is the importance of having earthworms and a bunch of earthworms who absolutely do not like tilling, who also provide, you know, their own sort of fertilizer and aeration for your plants. So I'm curious if you could actually have someone create like an earthworm farm. Those can exist.
Need to create earthworms?
Well, you can make something like that where you just essentially grow and harvest earthworms and sell them.
Yeah.
Huh.
I guess we have animal husbandry, so.
We've talked about permaculture, but we haven't implemented it yet. You know, just like, is that an alternative? I'm not going to till everything necessarily. I'm going to spray something to kill the weeds, and then I'm just going to dump a box full of earthworms and let them get to work. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I would do as a fisherman, but also have that intersection of wanting a pile of earthworms. So, you know, there is business for it.
But can tilling somehow make things worse? I don't know. Doesn't
That's
sound
a good
that
question.
way, but
Doesn't sound like it.
so
Badlands is the kind of biome I was thinking of. I don't know what makes something a badland, but I'm thinking pesticides could be something that would do that.
Because I feel like you're going to have those extremes, and that's where you're going to get kind of variability within what you can grow. Like the extremes, like the very different things you can grow. But a lot of the other stuff, you know, plains and forests and mountains, I mean, depending on temperature, you should basically be able to grow the same thing everywhere. It's just not that hard to get something to grow. And I guess it would be. Is it as hard to get a seed to sprout as it is to get a high yield? Or are those two separate things? Are they linked? There was a mention of the apple. You know, it's one thing to get the tree to grow to maturity. It's another to get the fruit to grow. But you really, I guess I feel like you shouldn't have to change things. It's the same plant. It's the same tree. So other than having a pollinator, it should thrive in whatever you allowed it to thrive in to begin with.
It could be that in the process of growing from seed to maturity, it's already eaten through the parts of the soil composition that it needs to grow fruit well. And so you have to go back through and add fertilizer or some sort of additive to the area to restore the soil. So that way, when it comes time for it to start budding, the buds actually turn into fruits instead of like I've seen with some of my plants sometimes where they start budding and then one decent wind happens on a hot day and I come back the next day and all the buds have fallen off. It's like, well, there goes all of those. Let's see. Yield is determined in part by the plant and part by what happens to it during growth. So I guess, yeah, if the soil became depleted, then I would imagine a tree would have a harder time putting out good fruit.
Yeah. We'll see how complex it is. What did...
I was wondering for Nero, it's a bit of a tangent, but he kind of, well, he didn't rant, so it's not much of a complaint, but he did kind of complain about the complexity for farming. But it seems like he might want this level of complexity if it were brewing. Like maybe it's just the type of crafting that makes this seem not as interesting for him.
You know, so I'm gonna say with my my document that I wrote on brewing, I gave examples of the end result, what you're getting out of it, why you're brewing, what the target is of the brew. And so with that, it was more of a concrete, like, here's what you're looking to get from the brewing process, and then, this distilling process or that process, and, plus or minus the different ingredients and other aspects of it, and what you use to ferment it, etc. But that's because I can, visually fathom what a magic potion versus a bottle of hooch is going to be, and its attributes and all of that sort of stuff for a game where that sort of stuff matters. I have no idea what a well-grown carrot versus a poorly grown carrot is going to matter. Other than, is it, do I have more of it or do I have less of it? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the thing that it gives me a little bit pause to have a system this complex, unless the end result, if the yield and the quality and the specificity of the things that you're making are so incredibly important that it actually warrants having this level of detail. Because if it doesn't, then no, I would actually be fine with just plant a seed in the ground and let it grow and having it as an abbreviated system so we can focus on all the other cool stuff in the game. Because there's tons of cool stuff in the game. But if it is in fact that complex and dynamic that you need to have all of these systems and this specificity and this risk reward in order for it to give you the results, because the resulting products actually matter that much. Their differences, their variations, their application actually matters that much. So much that if you don't grow a certain plant a certain way, you're never going to discover a glue required to build larger ships. Like, if that's the level of specificity we're talking about, hell yeah, this system matters, and that's awesome. But
that's what courses are for, right?
What was that? I don't know about horse paste for building ships.
Yeah, in my favorite single player MMORPG, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, their alchemy system was a lot of fun. You would go pick plants, and then you would start experimenting to see what combinations of those plants would yield potions. And you would start being able to figure out that this plant has properties that's going to be good for ice, or this one for fire, and stuff like that. And you could come up with a bunch of different potions. Sometimes you would fail on what you were trying to make, and you might make an unknown potion that you would need to drink and test to see what properties it gave you that was just completely unexpected, and you'd find, oh, that's the recipe for giant growth or shrinking potion or whatever. But I think there was generally some useful application for even the alchemical mistakes if it didn't damage you, which sometimes it would. So yeah, I think that would be the question. What do you do with you use the bad carrots, the carrots that you don't want to eat? Do you just have to throw them out? Do you try and make those into fertilizer? What do you do with the
feed them to the horses?
Composting. Oh, there you go. There's a comment there. Can compost the bad carrots.
The trust will eat them.
We're sort of getting towards the end, although we... Oh, go ahead.
Snipehunter actually did have a bit of a response to what I was saying there. He said, yield is determined in part by the plant itself, in part by what happens during the growth. Some plants will have an explicit requirement to fruit, some require a few years dormancy, some require certain weather, etc. Wouldn't be drastically different seed to seed with seeds of the same plant. Okay, and I was kind of talking about the, I think, growing and maturing and fruit and all that sort of stuff. And then one of the other things he said here during the bit that I was talking about, it's sort of like Star Wars Galaxies was in that quality of your ingredients plays into the quality of the final product and the production chain. But in our case, that's not just numbers. You pass on the properties and can grant unique states to the object being built. Hugely important to ensuring players can make items that are signature, unique, and meaningful ways, which is the heart of the commercial sim in the game. I still think about that. It's like, okay, so if you're making a specific type of beer, there's certain grains and certain processes that you'll do with those for malting, etc. The hops that you would want, the yeast that you would want. Okay, I can see how all of that specificity, a lot of that's going to be coming from your farming at first. Hard alcohol, same way. I could see for woodcraft stuff, if you aren't just going out and chopping down trees, but you're specifically growing trees that are meant to be a longer growing cycle, but they produce a denser, sturdier wood that's better for ships. That itself is kind of a long-term investment, but it is a business to get into. It could be that you just need to harvest the branches from those trees. You don't even have to fell it. So that's actually something that gives potential like long-term harvesting options. Geez, what else? There's a lot of things where plants would be involved. Anything where wood is involved, anything where something that you would ferment or distill that starts from a chemical or from a plant state.
Medicine.
Soy sauce.
Will we be able to create medicines from our plants?
Yeah, medicine actually is talked about in the initial document, I believe, in the post. So yeah, I could see a lot of different things, especially if it's a race that does a lot of stuff with plant work and plant craft. If they've got thicker leather-like leaves that they're able to kind of shape and craft into different stuff, making sure that the plants are producing, the thickest, woodiest, sorts of things for that makes sense. Making sure they've got the proper, the glue from whatever plants they use to stick it together is going to be as tacky as possible, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of different places. Also in textile, of course, growing your cotton, growing whatever you're going to making your fabrics out of, jute, whatever. It definitely makes sense that everything having a high level of quality and specificity, much like Star Wars Galaxies, which was mentioned in the example there, actually contributing to the final product does mean that farming is more than just sustaining the land, but it's like first level, quality of crafting and resources for anything that you're not basically getting out in the wild otherwise. So that's actually pretty cool. That actually makes farming seem like a lot more interesting of a system. I still don't think I'm going to be sitting down in any one place long enough to engage in farming, but I will appreciate the results of everyone else.
And Stipe mentions that really you're going to pass on your plants to an alchemist to create medicines. But there's certainly plenty of examples of plants that you can just pull a leaf off and chew it and get some sort of pain relief. So I wonder if
it's
something,
not for an alchemist.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, will I, can you over time create a plant that you don't even need an alchemist, right? It's a pain reliever. They can take it to battlefield. They just come pick some leaves off the plants or whatever.
Yeah, that's just mundane usage, but you might want to grow super tall for a little while or shrink or something else.
So before we run out of time, and this is part of why I wish Sog was able to join us, because I think he and you, Neuro, were kind of talking about it in chat, was the idea of player skill in crafting, not character skill, but player skill, and sort of where, I guess in some areas, types of crafts, it might make sense to have sort of a mini game or something to that degree. But I wonder what y'all think about that applying into like farming, because I don't see it that way, but I'm curious.
Unless there's a lot of breakdown and specificity, if there's just approximately one farming skill, and that's going to determine how well you can identify the quality of your plants and what's going on with them and the harvest and the timings and all of that sort of stuff. If it's all just boiled down to one specific skill, I think that might be for the better, for the sake of reducing the amount of things a player would need to know about the different states that can occur in the world and what they might associate with for somebody who doesn't actually have the farming skill or have access to somebody with the farming skill to identify what's going on. And so with that, it's I based on the description, that a lot of what you're doing with your farming skill is look at something using your farming skill, get information, and then take action based on that information. I don't know if the farming skill is also going to give you like branching tree suggestions of like, here's the state of what's going on. You could do this and it'll do this. You could do this and it'll do this. You can do this and it'll do this. Not automatically, clicking the box and then doing that thing, but kind of informatively, like, this much about farming based on the information it's given. Here's how you can act on it. If that's what the farming skill provides, and player skill is largely removed from the process when you get to the higher levels and the farming skill itself actually tells you everything, then I guess player skill is probably not going to matter as much, because there's only so much you can actually know as a player before the farming skill itself has to take over and give you information that isn't visually communicated. But I think at the same time, the farming skill is going to be there as the thing to let you know whether you as the player, or you as the character rather, know enough to inform the player as to make the right decision, or if the character at least knows enough to inform the player, hey, I don't freaking know, you need to ask for help from somebody who does know. And that's if that's what we're expecting the farming skill to do, is to be kind of like your guidance tool through the entire process, on top of potentially making skill checks and contests, if there are any, go a little bit better. That's kind of the thing that I'm thinking about. If there's a lot of different skills involved, then it might be a bit of a problem. Then player skill might become more of an issue, because that means you do need to know about all these different things, but your character might not necessarily be as far along in their knowledge of each one, even though you need to know each one. So, let's see.
That's exactly what I was.
So we've got a response here.
Yeah.
That's farming knowledge is kind of like the WebMD of your plants. Meanwhile, your farming skills make it easier to see the symptoms that are checked against your knowledge. To dredge and answer your knowledge base, there are the possibilities. You have to decide for yourself what you're doing about it. So you still have to know, and I guess that's player knowledge. You have to know what you want to do about the situation once you've actually identified it. But it sounds like that's something that the farming skill itself isn't going to tell you, whether you've got one farming skill or 100 farming skill. You're just going to need to be able to take some action as a player. So that's where you might need to ask other players, hey, here's these things, I've identified these symptoms and these issues, like, what the hell am I supposed to do now?
You actually just used the verbiage that when you guys were talking about this, that was in my head with this specific craft of farming, because I don't see it as player skill, because it's not a Twitch related. I see it as player knowledge. Right. More so than player skill.
Well, I think part of player skill, partly like knowing how to build your character, and I think of that as it's like, once you read the books about chess, that's going to teach you about strategies, and same for bridge or whatever. It's giving you skills in terms of tactics.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that being able to identify your 16 square meter plots is a player skill, and it's not really a character skill. It's something that you, the player, have to know how to be able to determine.
Yeah.
I can tell you one thing. I am not going to start off, and I do not think, well, I guess people can do what they want. As we're talking about all this, it absolutely makes no sense to me to start off trying to be a large-scale farming operation. The first several months of getting in this game, to me, it's going to be a smaller garden, a lot of different variety, a lot of different testing, a lot of trying to learn things, because it sounds like things are going to be knowledge wise, just I could see you just wasting so many resources. I guess part of that would also depend on how quickly disease spreads and other things like that. But I mean, you could lose an entire crop. It just seems to make much more sense as I read this post, as we talk about it, to just sort of start off small, learn, and then kind of go from there.
Starting off in a place that already exists, sparking into a child of a farmer on an operating farm, for example. That makes sense. So if you're starting as a farmer, it sounds like you would already be walking into a farm that's already, up and running.
You can do that as a count or a mayor.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know that the pledge level that you start with necessarily determines the spark. I think you can choose a spark to give life to and then determine whether that one's going to be your royal one or not. Maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah, I don't know. But I think it might be interesting, too, to try to start with the farming community. I mean, Snipe is already kind of saying that about sparking into a child of a farmer. But you might want to have players who are also interested in being farmers, all working together on the same farm or in that same, couple of farms, so that all of you can be experimenting together at the same time, same
weird. That's one of the things I think about is where they're probably actually going to be the best farmers, but only among their own peoples. Because I don't know they're necessarily going to share information with everybody else.
It says, I imagine some counts will spark into farmers because it interests them.
Yeah. Yeah, you can spark into anybody that meets the requirements. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Cool.
All right. Well, this has been a pretty fun hour. We are at the end of our time. As I'm sure everyone already knows, the domain selection starts. So we will probably, we've not really talked about it. We're obviously going to cover that and kind of work through things. But since it is such a, what is it, over how many weeks?
At least 4 weeks, if not 6.
Yeah. That will obviously be a big focus. So we're not yet sure if, our other show, there's also a stream occurring next week for Ashes. So we're still sort of debating kind of what we'll do next week. So we'll let everyone know what show. And so this was fun. I cannot wait to actually get in and try all this. So let's actually get a game that I can test for you, because I would love to test all this for you. Anyways, everyone have a...
Elyria.
Yeah. That being said, everyone, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week.
See you later, folks.
See ya.
Have a good one. Thanks for coming.